Yoga of Juan Matus and of other American Indian chiefs. Part 1. Well, friends, today we will begin to talk about another direction of yoga, a direction that was formed among the indigenous people, natives of America. And once again, we will be convinced that at the highest levels of understanding, at the highest levels, this methodology is the same for all advanced spiritual schools. It is people who fantasize and pervert, but God gives the same thing to everyone who is capable of perceiving it. Of perceiving the truth, regardless of what part of the Earth's surface they live, whether it be Atlantis, America, Russia, India, China, Southeast Asia, etc. Since it's a very early spring morning and it's chilly out, I appear in front of you in a different guise, in a hood. Later, I will take it off when the sun warms up. So, concerning this Native American spiritual school, which we will talk about today, this is the school of Juan Matus, or Don Juan, as Carlos Castaneda, who described this school, called him. We learned about this school precisely thanks to the works of Carlos Castaneda, which became a very significant event in the history of the earth. After all, this secret Native American Mexican school has become known throughout the world, thanks exactly to Carlos Castaneda. What is valuable in the books of Carlos Castaneda? Well, let us say the following. He was a writer. In particular, his wife described that he first told how everything really was, and then remade the texts so that it was more exciting and more intriguing for readers. Therefore, in the books of Carlos Castaneda, it is necessary to pay attention not to any mystical tricks, which he artistically described with a certain undue importance and with additions, but to understand that it is his conversations with the divine teacher, Don Juan, his divine friend, Genaro, and with Silvio Manuel, that are the most valuable. This is what is of the highest spiritual value, and it has already permanently entered the treasury of the highest spiritual knowledge for humanity. It should also be taken into account that the time of Castaneda's communication with Don Juan and his companions lasted for about 3 decades. And Castaneda described all this in his books. And besides, over these long years, not only Carlos himself changed, but Don Juan and his friends who walked the path with him did as well. Therefore, we should make a full and final evaluation of the school's work, not according to his initial stages of work that Carlos Castaneda also described, but based on the results which the school finally achieved. We described in detail the work of this school in the books God Speaks and classics of spiritual philosophy and the present. And now we will focus methodology formed by the school. So, where to start? Let us start with the fact that the universe consists of 2 parallel worlds, which are called the tonal, the world of material objects, the world of matter, solid and not solid, and the nagual, the totality of all other planes, eons, lokas, multidimensional space. We communicate with the world of matter, with the tonal, through the so-called first attention. I.e., through the senses of the physical body. But to become capable of cognizing the nagual, it is necessary to develop the second attention, that is, clairvoyance. There is also the third attention, by means of which one perceives the Creator. Including his manifestation, called the manifestation of the divine fire, to which Don Juan paid much attention. As for the fire, we know the same thing from the analysis of other branches of yoga. Agni Yoga, Pythagorean Yoga, and Yoga of the Atlanteans, as well as in others that we've discussed and will discuss in the future. It is noteworthy that there is a mention of the fire of hell in the Quran and in the Bible. Where is this idea from? It comes from how vicious people feel the divine fire. It burns and torments them. I personally observed this situation in various cases of Russian schizophrenics when they fall into the sphere of activity of the divine fire. Demons begin to twitch, tormenting them. Thus, the possessed feel bad. That's how the idea that sinners in hell are fried in pans or just burn in fire appeared. However, this is not hellfire at all, but how the people of hell in this way perceive the fire of God, one of the manifestations of the Creator. This fire, for true spiritual ascetics, is non-scorching, non-harming. On the contrary, merging with Him, we enter into mergence with the Creator and are filled with His bliss. For the righteous, this is the blessed fire. For sinners, it is the fire of hell on which they are roasted. Everyone can make a conclusion for themselves in this regard and correct their personal evolution. A person, according to the concept of Don Juan's school, can claim immortality. Immortality is emergence with the infinite and eternal primordial consciousness, with God in the aspects of the Creator or the Absolute. There is another form of immortality, when the material body becomes immortal. The spiritual ascetic who has become consubstantial with the Creator can absorb his own body into himself and then again materialize the body. We know historical examples of this, at least Jesus Christ. A person who has resolved to achieve immortality first of all, according to the concept of the school, should become a hunter, but not a hunter who kills animals, but one that hunts for true higher spiritual knowledge. When he has found this knowledge and has mastered it, he can go to an even higher stage of his development. He becomes a spiritual warrior. This work begins when one accepts the principle of following the path of love, path of the heart, the spiritual heart. And this is the basis of ethics. This is the basis of psychoenergetic work on oneself. The next step in psychoenergetic work is the division of the bioenergetic cocoon which surrounds the human body in two parts. The cocoon of ordinary people encompasses a volume of space up to about half a meter from the body. What is this bioenergetic cocoon? This is the total radiation, the total energy field of all the cells of the body, as well as of the energy structures, including the chakras. There is such an egg-shaped cocoon around the body of every person, including the space above the head and below the feet. And one can see with clairvoyance both the foci of diseases and of energy damages that in the future will cause diseases of certain organs. These foci can be seen as dark spots in the cocoon. In particular, perhaps the main version of bioenergy diagnostics is based on this. By influencing these foci with the power of a healer, it is possible to cure and even to prevent diseases that have not even started yet, but could start. Each cocoon is divided into two unequal parts, the upper and the lower bubbles of perception. Why bubble? Why did such a term arise? Because the cocoon divided into two bubbles of perception is outwardly similar to the swimming bladders or bubbles of some fish, in which these swimming bladders lie within the body without being attached to the spine. Why of perception? Because through the upper bubble of perception, we communicate mainly with the world of tonal, and through the lower bubble of perception, we communicate with the world of nagual. The upper bubble of perception includes the three upper chakras, two of the head and one of the neck, and the other four are in the lower bubble of perception. Meditative work is carried out due to the lower bubble of perception. It is this structure which includes the spiritual heart and the energy power supply, consisting of the three lower chakras. Precisely this structure can and must grow quantitatively. It is with this structure, consisting of a huge spiritual heart, whose energy is supplemented by the appendage of the lower dantian, and also with the intellectual component, the upper bubble of perception, that allows us to enter into the divine eons. That is, we enter as a spiritual heart with its two appendages, the power one and the intellectual one. The spiritual heart must necessarily have arms of consciousness, with the help of which one can move in the multidimensional absolute, influence one's own body, and also help other people. Moreover, to move on the spiritual path through the quantitative growth of consciousness is possible only after its refinement. It makes sense to grow only by the refined consciousness, and in no case by the initially coarse one, that is, by the consciousness of an average embodied person living on the earth. There are special techniques for refining the consciousness. First of all, it is the observance of ethical principles, non-condemnation, non-envy, non-covetousness, non-defensiveness, and also living without anger. And all these states can really be achieved precisely through the work with the chakras. Thanks to the work on the crystallization of the refined consciousness due to the lower bubble of perception, namely due to the spiritual heart growing from the middle dantian, the Anahata chakra. Although I must emphasize that the Native Americans did not know these terms. They called it a little bit differently. They didn't have a clear terminology. So I translated by myself into an understandable modern language. And thanks to his work, the Native Americans reached the state of nirvana, both in its static version and in the dynamic one. What does the dynamic aspect of nirvana mean? This is when we not only disappear in mergence with the Creator, but when we begin to act actively from the state of nirvana with the arms of the developed consciousness. For example, by healing or helping in other ways. Moreover, these actions can spread over vast distances. Well, at least within our entire planet. A variant of nirvana necessary for acquiring its static aspect for the very process of merging with the Creator is the state of nirodhi. This term is known from Buddhism. The Native Americans did not know this term either, but at the school of Don Juan, they spoke of it as of the rolling force. What does it mean? We have already discussed the topic of the egg-shaped energy cocoon that surrounds the human body, in which diseases visible by clairvoyance can be lurking. And at the same time, the cocoon of a healthy person serves as his protective shell. But the negative component in this situation is that the cocoon separates us from the environment, especially if we are engaged in the shifting of the assemblage point, which is the distribution of ourselves as consciousnesses in different positions. We can either localize ourselves inside the body, in a certain organ, chakra, or inside of some part of self-consciousness, or we can set a goal to merge with the Creator. But in order to merge, we need to destroy our individuality. We need to destroy this very cocoon that separates us from the environment. Of course, when saying environment in a situation of spiritual work, one must understand it as the environment of the divine, higher, subtlest eons of the multidimensional space. Don Juan and other members of that school spoke about working with the rolling force. We must allow the force existing around the cocoon to break this cocoon and fill it, flood it. And then the former I may not be perceived at all, or may be perceived in the form of just a small geometric vertical line, if the body is standing upright, not more. This is not a physical structure, but simply a small vertical geometric line around which the ocean of God exists. However, for those who have not yet learned to live as a spiritual heart, it is impossible to perform this and even understand what has been said, because all this is performed only if the spiritual heart is developed. There are no other options for cognizing Nirodhi. In such a way, God is cognized and immortality is achieved. In such a way, one attains full self-realization and completely fulfills the meaning of his or her life as a person, continuing to live as an integral part of the primordial consciousness. Now, let us consider those specific methods used in the school that we can apply to ourselves. All of them can be divided into two groups, preliminary and basic ones. The first of the preliminary methods was a recapitulation. What is it? It is an analysis of all the erroneous acts in one's life. It is a repentance through which every person on the spiritual path must necessarily go. For what reason? Not in order to beg forgiveness from God, but in order to learn not to sin again. What are sins? These are ethical mistakes. And what are ethical mistakes? This is, first of all, harming other creatures. We make such mistakes for various reasons. Due to self-interest, and due to the fact that we do not know how to regulate our emotions and fall into negative states of consciousness. In order to make the disciples of this school diligently engage in recapitulation, they were told that they would be able to regain all the wasted energy as a result of their own erroneous actions. They were told that one could regain this energy if he or she relived all the situations anew, but this time ethically, correctly, and this scheme worked. It was also necessary to destroy the feeling of self-importance, as well as the feeling of self-pity. These are qualities that really lead to the greatest waste of one's energy, called personal power. After all, if one views oneself as being very important, and someone else encroaches on this importance with his or her disrespectful attitude, one reacts with an emotional outburst of resentment, anger, etc. In this process, the energy of the organism that could have been spent on the correct growth of consciousness is intensively wasted. Here is an interesting and instructive fact from the life of Carlos Castaneda. When his study in Don Juan's school came to an end, he and his closest companion, Lagorda, though Castaneda became a millionaire thanks to the publication of books, in spite of this, he and Lagorda got hired under false names as servants in a rich house, where they suffered humiliation, insults, injustices, etc., from the treachery of other servants. Castaneda and Lagorda resorted to this in order to completely destroy the feeling of their own importance in themselves. Castaneda then formulated very well: everything that happens to a spiritual warrior on the physical plane does not matter. And what truly matters is only the state of the consciousness. Wonderful words. After all, it doesn't really matter compared to the supreme goal. It is necessary, according to Don Juan's teachings, to learn to be naught, not to defend oneself, but to be invulnerable. And the state of being invulnerable comes when there is no me, when there is only God. One can say the same thing in other terms. The lower individual self disappears, and only the higher self remains. We must find this higher self, the most important part of ourselves, and become it. Or in other terms, we must merge with our Atman, and then, by the Atman, merge with Paramatman. Thus, the Native Americans spoke about the same things as other advanced spiritual schools. Their terminology was different, although the essence was the same. In order to make what has already been said possible, it is necessary, among other things, to sweep the tonal as Don Juan taught. For what reason? In order to uncover the nagual, and later uncover its most important part, which is cognized by the third attention. This is the highest self, the Paramatman, or, what is the same, the primordial consciousness, the Creator, God the Father, Allah, Tao. Don Juan very wisely explained this to the disciples. Once he assembled them, took a sack, put everything that he found on the table in the house of one of them into it, gave the sack to one of the disciples to carry, gave the table to another one to carry, and led everyone to the desert. There he ordered to put the table in the middle of the valley, and then dumped the entire contents of the sack on it, took the disciples to some distance from the table, and asked them what they saw. And they began to list what they saw, that they saw a tape recorder, a radio, a watch, etc. Then Don Juan came to the table, whisked everything off it, and began, and again asked what they saw. And then they finally understood that they now saw the table too, which they had not noticed at the beginning. And even more than that, they began to see the space around the table. From this example, we should understand that there should be nothing superfluous in the life of a spiritual warrior, but only that which is really necessary to facilitate the spiritual path and help others in this. We can recall a similar example from the history of early Christianity, in which the monks in their cells had only icons, some liturgical books, and a coffin in which they slept. The coffin, in particular, reminded them of the death of the body, which approaches each of us every day every hour. And in this regard, we need to try to do as much as possible without wasting time on non-important things. Don Juan also taught to destroy the stereotypes of material life as, for example, the strict observance of a daily routine. For what purpose? Because these stereotypes fetter us. Depriving us of our freedom if we become attached to them. Whereas we should be attached only to the most important things. And what is the most important thing? The most important thing is the Creator as one's purpose, as one's teacher. The death of the body is also important. It should hasten us on the spiritual path. There must be a constant remembrance of death. Destruction of the unreasonable patterns of life in the tonal leads to a loss of the human form. That is, it leads to the state when a person learns to act, not reflexively or because it is customary, but in accordance with objective advisability at any given moment. Castaneda described the fantasies of Don Juan's disciples about how the loss of the human form looks like. But all these were just fantasies of those who, in fact, had not yet lost their human form and did not yet have a complete idea of it. This is not a short-term mechanical act. It's a prolonged process, accompanying a human's gradual approach to the Creator. When we were learning to live in the tonal, we would distribute indriyas, tentacles of consciousness, onto the objects of the material world, of the tonal. But as we approach the Creator, and He becomes more and more real for us, we redirect more and more of these tentacles of consciousness to Him. This is the process of losing the human form. Moreover, this process must be accompanied by intellectual analysis, taking into account the ethical component, otherwise it just won't work. The completion of this process can be ascertained when a spiritual ascetic learns to look at earthly situations with the eyes of the Creator. That is, there is emergence with the Creator, the infusion of oneself as a developed consciousness into God, in the aspect of the Creator, who is also called the primordial consciousness. And now, one looks from the Creator at the situation of his or her body and of the fates of other people. Only then does one complete the process of getting rid of the human form, of getting rid of everything superfluous that one has acquired in the process of lives in the tonal. But attaining the loss of the human form does not at all mean that we become unlike everyone else, that society now regards us as outcasts. This would lead to inevitable conflicts with the social order. And therefore, Don Juan proposed the principle of so-called controlled folly. That is, externally, we must not differ from the crowd, so that a crowd does not begin to behave aggressively towards us. But while behaving externally like other people who do not follow the spiritual path, internally we observe ourselves and laugh at the folly of various unavoidable situations. But in our case, this folly is controlled as we maintain a conscious awareness of our actions. Illustrating the concept of controlled folly to Castaneda, Don Juan once put on an immaculate European suit for his trip to the town. And once they were sitting on a bench near a Catholic church and saw how two middle-aged ladies hesitated about descending several steps. Then Don Juan elegantly came and helped them to go down. And advised them that if they, God forbid, fell, they should not move until a doctor arrived. The ladies were sincerely grateful to him for this advice. But the spiritual warrior lives constantly remembering about the main signs in his life. This is the supreme goal and his inevitable death, which urges him on. And Don Juan, in order to make it more understandable, suggested that we imagine that the personification of death is always with us. He said that if we quickly and unexpectedly look back over the left shoulder, then it is possible to catch a glimpse of death. He explained that it awaited us, sitting next to us, behind our back, on the same mat. It waits for when we make an ethical mistake to pick us up. That is, one must regard one's life with full responsibility. To regard it as a possibility of defeating death by gaining immortality. In mergence with the immortal Creator, with the eternal and infinite primordial consciousness. Excerpts from the books of Carlos Castaneda. How can anyone feel so important when we know that death is stalking us? The thing to do when you are impatient is to ask advice from your death. An immense amount of pettiness is dropped if your death makes a gesture to you, or if you catch a glimpse of it, or if you just have the feeling that your companion is there watching you. Death is a wise advisor that we have. One has to ask death's advice and drop the cursed pettiness that belongs to men that live their lives as if death will never touch them. If you do not think of your death, all your life will just be personal chaos. The warrior knows that death is stalking him and won't give him time to cling to anything. And thus, with an awareness of death and with the power of his own decisions, the warrior sets life in a strategic manner, and what he chooses is always strategically the best. And thus, the warrior performs everything with gusto and lusty efficiency. Life for the warrior is an exercise in strategy. Without the awareness of death, everything is ordinary, trivial. It is only because death is stalking us that the world is an unfathomable mystery. You have little time left and no time for crap. A wonderful state. The best of us always comes out when we are against the wall, when we feel the sword dangling overhead. I wouldn't have it any other way. Another important aspect of this work is mastering the mental pause. Mental pause, in other words, inner silence. But in the school that we are talking about, they used the term stoppage of inner dialogue, and this is not really correct. After all, there are also inner monologues. Mastering the mental pause is an absolutely necessary prerequisite for mastering the Nagwal. Because the Nagwal is mastered by means of meditation. And meditation, as Rajneesh also put it nicely, is a state of non-mind. That is, all this inner chatter is carried out in the upper bubble of perception, in the Ajna chakra, which is located in the center of the head. And as we already discussed, meditation is realized due to the lower bubble of perception. For the purpose of attaining the mental pause, Don Juan used, among other things, psychedelics. It should be noted, however, that he used this method only at the very beginning of their joint work, when not everything was clear for him yet. Later, he abandoned this, and Castaneda complained that although he was immensely grateful to Don Juan for everything that he had done for him, nonetheless, his, Castaneda's, liver was still marked with scars. And as far as we know, Castaneda left his earthly body because of liver cancer. Therefore, I never advise anyone to use any psychedelics, drugs. After all, there are other, far more effective and harmless means to achieve the goal. Another unique technique of spiritual work developed in this school is the interaction of disciples with people tyrants. This technique was employed for attainment of the ethical impeccability of the spiritual warrior. That is, the ability to follow ethical principles and adhere to the strategy of objectively valid behavior, rather than stereotyped behavior in situations of urgency. Sometime in the past, Don Juan himself was sent by his teacher to a fierce foreman tyrant for such training. In Mexico, such people were considered very rare, unlike some other countries. Now, let us list the methods of psychoenergetical work used in Don Juan's school. Cleansing of the inner luminosity, that is, the purification of the cocoon, and getting rid of all coarse inclusions. Use of places of power, which are zones on the surface of the earth or water on our planet, that are energetically significant for people. We talked about this in detail in our book, Ecopsychology. In particular, there are positive places of power that are extremely favorable for mastering specific meditations. Personally, I and my companions worked in this way and achieved success. Moreover, we worked in this way thanks to those techniques developed in the school of Don Juan and described by Carlos Castaneda. Another term used in this school is dreaming. We need to discuss this in more detail because few readers understand what it is. The fact is, the term meditation was not familiar to the Native Americans, which is to be expected, since it is a term of European origin. Moreover, the meditation techniques themselves were only mastered gradually and with difficulties in Don Juan's school, because they did not have any meditation instructions that were left to them by their predecessors. And at first, they unsuccessfully tried to adapt the night sleep for his work. That is why the term dreaming arose, because meditative images sometimes are similar to what we see in our dreams. Well, it's better to completely forget about the term dreaming and not concern ourselves with this at night, but simply switch to the generally accepted, now well-known term, meditation. There was another method used in the school. When disciples still had serious vices, for example, an inclination to selfishly attack other people, then they were suggested to take part in a magical fight where their vices were made fun of. The preceptor who created such extreme magical situations knew in advance the outcome of such fights. Of course, there are much better, calmer, and milder methods of cleansing oneself from vices, and there is no need to fight with anyone at all. Another method that has already been mentioned today is shifting of the assemblage point. However, Castaneda described this technique very indistinctly and in different ways. It is evident that when he wrote about this in his books, he himself did not understand this. Shifting of the assemblage point is the shifting of the zone of concentration of oneself as a consciousness. One can shift the assemblage point within one's body or cocoon. Or one can transfer oneself as a consciousness to a space getting very far from the body. One can assume different forms, including giant ones, or going from one spatial dimension to another, including the most subtle ones. All of this corresponds to the term shifting of the assemblage point. One more technique that I have already mentioned is the practice of leveling off the energy emanations inside the cocoon in accordance with the outer emanations through the use of the technique rolling force, among others. Also, work with the lower dantian or hara aimed at the development of the power aspect of the consciousness. The last thing that they had among their techniques was working with allies, that is, with spirits. I do not want to offend them. But in particular, they joked around about carrying those spirits in special traps made out of dried pumpkins, believing that such spirits could, as if, be imprisoned in this way. Such was their search for methods. Later they discarded all this. When God became real for Don Juan and his companions, then they stopped distributing their indriyas onto little developed creatures, i.e. spirits. Working with spirits as an attempt to get spiritual help from them is a very dangerous technique. It is very easy to make mistakes here, falling into the traps of deceiving spirits. I advise you not to do this. It is necessary from the very beginning to choose God as the teacher. I did so and achieved success. And now it's time to summarize everything that we have discussed. Don Juan pointed out 3 directions in the system of spiritual knowledge that he possessed. The art of stalking, the art of intent, and the art of consciousness. In the history of this Native American spiritual tradition, the art of stalking initially consisted in the ability to sneak to stalk unnoticed among people who do not understand you, to achieve your goal, the supreme goal, which those people do not have. But later on, the emphasis shifted to the stalking of one's own vices. That is, the art of stalking became, first of all, the art of stalking one's vices in order to get rid of them. Let me quote one interesting and fair formula given by Don Juan. Power. This term was used in the school for the primordial consciousness, God the Father. God is designated by the word power in the New Testament as well. Power provides for us according to our impeccability. That is, God, in the aspect of the Creator, gives us an opportunity to approach Him as we perfect ourselves ethically. The art of intent, in this context, is the same as the aspiration to the supreme goal. People with a correctly developed intent were called spiritual warriors. The third direction is the art of consciousness. It is what Buddhi Yoga is. The higher stage of meditative work in any developed spiritual school, not only this one. We could see once again that God, through His representatives, called Holy Spirits, irrespective of where certain schools are located, on which continent, in which country, in what languages people working in these schools speak. God always gives people the same methodology of spiritual development, the methodology of approaching Him, the methodology of gaining immortality, emergence with Him, the Immortal. End of part 1.